Next time you go to the grocery store, you're going to put the same things into your cart, the same brands, the same store, the same routine, and the total is going to be 30 or even maybe $40 more than it was 2 years ago. You're not buying anything new, nothing got upgraded, the eggs are still the same eggs, and the bread is the same bread. But something changed, and nobody called you, nobody sent you a letter, and nobody asked for this to happen. You already know the word for this: inflation. But knowing the word isn't the same as knowing what actually happened, or who, if anyone, is responsible. That's what we're going to figure out. Here's the thing about inflation: it's not new. It's not even close to being new. Around 200 AD, the Roman Empire was running out of money, wars was expensive, feeding millions of people is expensive, and keeping an empire held together is expensive. And at some point, the emperors looked at the treasury and realized they had a problem. So they did something clever, or at least they thought it was clever. Roman coins at that time were made of real silver. The coins wasn't just a symbol of value, it was the value. So the emperors started shaving tiny amounts of silver off the edges of the coin, collecting the shavings and melting them down to mint new coins. More coins, same amount of silver. At first, nobody noticed, but over time, merchants started feeling their coins and realizing they were lighter than they used to be. So they started charging more silver per transaction to make up for it. Prices rose across the empire, not because anything got scarcer, not because anything got more expensive to make, but because the money itself had been quietly diluted. Historians call this debasement. The Roman government didn't call it anything. They just kept doing it until inflation ran so hot that parts of the empire started abandoning coins altogether and going back to trading grain. Fast forward 1800 years, different tools, but same idea. Here's the simplest way to understand modern inflation. Imagine a small town, 10 people, 10 loaves of bread, and each loaf of bread costs $1. Simple enough. Now imagine every person in that town wakes up tomorrow with an extra $100 in their pocket. Nobody earned it, it just appeared. But there are still only 10 loaves of bread. What happens? Everyone can suddenly afford to pay more for bread. So the baker charges more: $2, $5, whatever the market will bear. The bread didn't change, it's the exact same bread. The money just became worth less because there was more of it competing for the same amount of stuff. That's inflation. Not prices going up, purchasing power going down. And that raises a question everyone should be asking: where did all the extra money come from? In 2020, governments around the world face a crisis unlike anything in living memory. The economy didn't slow down, it stopped. Planes grounded, restaurants empty, supply chains frozen, hundreds of millions of people suddenly with no income. So governments did what governments do in emergencies. They spent massively. Stimulus checks, business loans, and unemployment support. In the United States alone, the government injected roughly $5 trillion into the economy in under 2 years. Other countries did the same. At the same time, central banks, the institutions that sit above regular banks and control the money supply, started creating on a scale most people don't fully grasp. The US Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet by nearly $3 trillion in the first 2 months of the pandemic alone. The European Central Bank did something similar, and so did the Bank of England. This was not money sitting in a vault somewhere. It was created digitally, pushed into financial systems, and it worked. The economy didn't collapse. But all the new money had to go somewhere, and it did. Right into your grocery bill. But here's what most people don't realize: sometimes inflation has nothing to do with money at all. In 2021, the global supply chain broke down. Not slowed down, but broke down. Factories across Asia had to shut down during COVID. Shipping containers were stranded in the wrong ports. There weren't enough dock workers. There weren't enough truck drivers. There was a worldwide shortage of semiconductors, the microchips that go into everything from cars to appliances to medical equipment. Less stuff and same amount of money trying to buy it. Prices went up automatically. Economists called this a supply shock and had nothing to do with how much money governments printed. It was simply the math of scarcity. When oil prices spike because of a war, a cut in production, a political decision, the cost of making and shipping virtually everything goes up with it, because everything requires energy to exist. So you had both things happening at once: too much money and not enough goods, which is more or less how you get the worst inflation in 40 years. Governments that overspent, the central banks that created too much money too quickly, a global pandemic that shattered supply chains. Those are the honest answers for most of it. But there's a fourth that doesn't get talked about enough. Between 2021 and 2023, while everyday people were being crushed by rising prices, many of the world's largest corporations quietly posted record profits. Not decent profits, but record profits. Companies in food, energy, housing, and shipping. Some economists started calling this greedflation, the idea that companies use the chaos of inflation as cover to raise prices higher than their costs actually required. Blame supply chains, blame wages, then kept the difference. Isabella Weber, an economist at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, published research in 2022 arguing that corporate pricing power was significant and underreported driver of inflation. She was widely dismissed at first, then the profit reports kept coming in. Not everyone agrees. The debate is real and ongoing, but the fact that it has a name and the fact that corporate profits and inflation peaked at the same time probably tells you something. So, what do they do to fix it? The main tool is interest rates. And this part matters because it affects you directly. When inflation gets out of control, central banks raise interest rates. That makes borrowing money more expensive across the entire economy. Mortgages go up, car loans go up, business loans get pricier, and credit cards sting more. When borrowing is expensive, people spend less. When people spend less, demand drops. When demand drops, prices stop rising as fast. It works, but it's slow, blunt, and painful. And the people who feel it the most are the ones who can least afford it. The person who's trying to buy their first home, the small business that needs a loan to survive for the winter, and the family carrying credit card debt. And sometimes central banks overshoot. They raise rates too high and too fast. Spending drops too much. Businesses start cutting jobs. The economy contracts. We call that a recession. Inflation isn't neutral. It doesn't land the same way for everyone. If you have savings sitting in a bank account earning 1% interest while inflation runs at 8%, you are losing money every single year. Not on paper, but in real life. If you have debt, a mortgage, a student loan, inflation is quietly on your side. The number you owe stays fixed, but that number means less every year. If you own assets, a house, stocks, land, those tend to rise with inflation. If you're on a fixed pension that doesn't adjust, every year's a pay cut. Same number, less life. So nobody called you, nobody sent you a letter, nobody voted on it, but now you know what actually happened to that grocery bill. It wasn't one person, it wasn't one decision, it was a system. Governments, central banks, broken supply chains, and maybe some companies who saw an opportunity, all pulling in the same direction at the same time. And the next time you're standing at a checkout, watching the total climb, you'll know exactly what you're looking at. See you next time.